Title of the sermon today, Captured by a Better Vision. That's not my title. Well, it's my title, but it's the name of a book also. And a book well worth reading on sexual purity and the vision that God lays out in the scriptures. Captured by a Better Vision. Well worth a read. In 1950, Hugh Hefner launched the world's first girly magazine, Playboy. And in an instant, the revolution had begun. Described by many as the greatest advancement of the Western world, the impact of the sexual revolution is not easily overstated. The movement came with a worldview. The worldview was this: we've been repressed from long-held traditions, old school values, and religious institutions. These have prevented us from living out our ideals and our true self. Hugh Hefner said this. He said, "One of the motivations for launching this magazine was in reaction to the far and hypocrisy of my Methodist religious upbringing." The answer? The sexual revolution brought freedom to express sexuality as you see fit, not shaped by others or determined ways, but shaped by you. You can finally be yourself, we've been told. You can finally be free. In 1961, the pill was released and promised sexual freedom without the fear of unwanted pregnancy. And let's be clear, amongst many things that the revolution has brought, many of them are actually very good. The sexual revolution has begun and continues to fight for the equality for women across all areas of society, closing the gap in pay, leave, and social identity. Only recently have women been considered able to play professional sport and get paid for it. In 1967, it was no longer illegal to be gay or lesbian. And this community was given a seat at the table of society rather than being openly shamed and vilified. Some good things did come out of the sexual revolution, but we've got to be honest. The movement failed. We may have gained some sort of sexual freedom, sure, but has it worked? Are we freer? I don't think so. In the 1980s, AIDS swept across many continents. Its main way of spreading was through sexual activity. And according to the Missouri Medicine Journal, there has been a 10-fold rise in the United States currently in sexually transmitted infections over the last 10 years. Between 1960, the sort of beginning of the revolution, and 1980, the rate of divorce increased, not doubled, but 6 times. Marriage rates dropped. People now had the freedom to cohabitate without the stress of marriage. An amazing scientist, Helen Fisher, studied 78 societies and people groups and asked this question: why are you no longer getting married? The answer was overwhelming. I am terrified of divorce. The revolution has failed and it's left some carnage in its wake. But it's into this mess that our God speaks. You see, for God, this issue is important. God has got skin in the game. And the Bible does not shy away from the topic of marriage and infidelity and sexuality. Now, we Christians who read the Bible, we might have become a little bit embarrassed about the topic and have become silenced on it, but we don't need to be, because these issues, they're not new. They've been around for centuries in the same way, so has the Bible. And in the Bible, we find a vision of a better story. We're captivated by a better vision of sex and sexuality, of marriage and of love. So today in Proverbs 5, we're going to hear from the ancient father to his ancient son some wisdom, the wisdom of Proverbs. He's going to say this: son, don't buy the lie. Sexual freedom will only bring captivity and a world of pain. That's essentially the message of Proverbs 5. Now, Proverbs 5 is speaking father to a son, like quite a lot of the Proverbs are. And you might get a feeling that the problem in the sexual revolution is women, the adulteress. That's what you might get the feeling as we read that. But I just want to say that is a rhetorical device used in Proverbs. It's not always the case, and we know that in the case of infidelity and adultery, men and women are equally to blame in the affair. I just wanted to point that out in case you thought the Bible is sort of skewed one way as you come to read Proverbs 5. It is skewed in Proverbs 5. It's a father to a son. But it's not skewed generally, and the Bible is quite open and clear about that. So, what does the father say to the son? He gives us 4 tips on how to remain faithful in marriage and to keep the wisdom of God in marriage. But before we get to those 4 tips, I thought we should get on the same page about what exactly marriage is, according to the Bible, and what exactly adultery is, according to the Bible. I just want us to be clear about what those things are. So the first thing, marriage. What is marriage? Well, marriage is the union of one woman and one man to become one flesh. That one fleshness, according to the Bible, is expressed most clearly in the act of sex and sexuality. If you can imagine 2 coloured bits of Play-Doh, let's say blue and white, let's say for example, and you bring those 2 together and you mix it around and create a ball, and then someone comes and says, now pull those 2 colours apart, it's very, very difficult. And that's the picture we're getting of marriage in the Bible. One flesh together expressed in sex. And it's meant to be marriage for as long as the married people are alive or one of them dies. Sex within marriage is good, it is healthy, and it is right. I personally have been really surprised about how candidly the Bible speaks of the pleasure of the joy of sex. Someone with a low view of it will start to feel that these desires are evil and wrong. But that's just not true. It's fun, it's beautiful, but importantly for us, marriage is the place where those desires are fulfilled. Now, there's a reason why we have a very high view of marriage in the Bible, because this is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, in speaking of marriage, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, the 2 shall become one flesh. Look at this. The mystery is profound. I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So the marriage is reflecting the Christ and church, the love Christ has for his church and vice versa. It's an example, a model, a representation of the love Jesus has for his followers. I think that's fascinating. I did go to Switzerland, but before I went to Switzerland, I wanted to know what Switzerland was like. So I got one of those snow globes. That's not exactly true. I didn't. I went on Google. But you can imagine one of the snow globes. You remember the snow globes? They were kind of a dome, and you would shake it up, and it would show you a picture of Switzerland, and the snow would come down on a little house. You know those things, what I'm talking about? Right. It's not really Switzerland. It's giving you a little picture of Switzerland, a little version of it. And in the same way, marriage and the act of sex within it is a miniature of what's going on between Christ and God and his church, the 2 becoming one. So it is clearly quite important. Now, adultery. What is adultery? Adultery is, according to most definitions, something along these lines: willful activity, sexual activity, with someone other than your legal husband or wife. I say legal because some of us are inclined to think of ourselves married to our long-term partners. We just haven't done the ceremony. We're basically married, is what we would often say. But in God's eyes, marriage begins with the ceremony and not before. It's standing before him and saying, I and my partner are becoming one. Jesus' definition of adultery went beyond just sexual activity outside of the marriage, and he said this: when you lust after someone in your heart, that is the same as committing adultery, Matthew 5:28. Paul expanded it even further to encompass all of sexual immorality. That is activity, thought and heart and mind outside of marriage. That is adultery. Adultery is marriage's enemy, no matter what we've been told by the revolution. So as I said, the Father to the Son says, if adultery is the enemy to marriage, I'm going to give you 4 tips to avoid it. That's what he says. And that's what I'm going to move to now. The 4 things that the Father says to his Son in Proverbs 5. The first is this. He says, get out of there. Flee, run away. Have a look with me at verses 1 and onwards. I'm going to read. Proverbs 5. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Turn your ears to my words of insight. You notice the Father always begins by this. Son, listen. Pay attention. Stop falling asleep. He says, verse 3, for the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Verse 8, keep a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. Flee, run away. Watch out for the forbidden woman. Yes, she might be alluring to the sun. It is a temptation for sure, says the Father. No one's denying that. Her speech, have you noticed in Proverbs, it's so much about who you're listening to. Her speech. Listen to my words, says the Father, not her words to the Son. And the Father here in Proverbs 5 urges his Son, take a different road. Verse 8, keep far from her. That path leads to death. Go nowhere near it. This is exactly what it's like for me in Claremont, just up the road here. Because in Claremont, I get lost and I do not trust my GPS. I don't trust it. And I get on the same road every time. I think it's Abbotsfield Drive. And before I know it, I'm taking a round onto the Brooker. I don't want to be there. It's taking me back onto the Brooker. You can't get off until you get back into Rosetta or even Glenorchy. I should have taken the path my GPS was saying, but it didn't make any sense. There's these strange turns, and I trusted my own sense, and I got in a mess. It happens every time I go to Claremont. Sorry, Alex, that's why I don't come over. Claremont's just a mess. But the path was right on the GPS. I should have just listened to it. And here the Father's saying, there is a better path. And the path is, don't go near her path. Flee, run away. Paul, in the New Testament, what does he say of sexual immorality? He doesn't say, get really, really close as you can get. Because, of course, that's how we think about sexual immorality. How close can I get before it becomes a problem for me? How close can I get? Paul says, no, flee, run away from it. Don't get as near as you can. Get far, far away from it. If you're on a diet and you see a delicious packet of Allen's python snakes, that is my weakness. And I'm lost in Claremont and I'm wondering, and there's a thing of snakes. You might be tempted to get as close as you can to them, maybe smell the delight. I'm on a diet, I'm not going to eat it. I'll just get as close. But you know that you're asking for trouble. But if on that table you suddenly realise it's not a packet of Allen snakes, but it's a deadly brown snake, are you still going up to sniff the brown snake? No, you're going far, far, far away from it. That's the word flee. That's what Paul is saying. That's what the Father is saying, flee. So the first tip, flee sexual immorality. Go the other direction. What's his next tip? Well, it's this one. Take the long view. Have a look with me. Verse 7 onwards. Now, son, listen to me. Do not turn aside to what I say. Go to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. Verse 9. Lest you lose your honour to others, your dignity to someone who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth, toil in reach the house of another. And then in the end of your life, in the long view, you will groan in your flesh, your body will be spent, and you will say, How I hated discipline. Why did I spurn correction? I did not obey my teachers, and I was soon in serious trouble. Do you see, adultery doesn't just affect you in the long term. Have a look at verse 14. It affects your relationship in the assembly of God's people. We see that all the time. When someone strays and when problems arise, it makes a mess of their friendship and their relationship, but also really affects the assembly of God's people. Verse 14. Take the long view. If the married man fails to listen, he stands to lose everything here. Power, wealth, the fruit of hard-earned labour. What he thought would bring him freedom, in fact, is only bringing heartache and pain and regret. He may well escape with his life initially, but his standing in the community has gone. Take the long view. Short-term pain or long-term gain? That's what's at stake here. It's our choice. Here's the third tip that the father says here. Number 3, stay loyal. Having warned his son not to go down the path, to keep the long view, he now turns to the positive. Return to your wife, he says. Have a look at verse 15. There's a few interesting things here. Verse 15. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets and your streams in the water in the public squares, let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. Verse 19. She's a loving doe, a graceful deer. I hope no one calls Louise that, by the way, a loving doe or a graceful deer, but it's used here. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. See that word intoxicated? The literal translation is be led astray. Always be led astray by her love. Why, son, be led astray by another? Return to that wife. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, he says. He says, should your springs be scattered abroad? They're for yourself, not for others. That word stranger there in verse 17, not to be shared with strangers. That word strangers is the male version of that word. You've got the female version. That would be talking about female strangers. Here, the father's talking about male strangers. What's he saying here? He says, never let these streams, your water, that is your love and sexuality, be not shared with male strangers. Because what's going on here is the father saying, if you find yourself wandering with another, it's possible that your partner will go and find herself wandering with another. And is that what you want? No, this is for you, the two of you together. So return to the wife, the partner of your youth. That's what he's saying here. Stay home, be loyal, return to your own marriage bed. But not just return to it. Rejoice, verse 18. May your fountain be blessed. May you rejoice in the wife of your youth. Be ever intoxicated, as I said, with her love. I love that. Be led astray by the love of your partner. Why be led astray by the forbidden woman, the forbidden person? So that tip, be loyal. And the fourth tip, finally, fear God. It's our final instruction. Comes out of the blue a little bit. We've been talking about your relationship. Bam, fear God. Have a look with me in the last couple of verses. Verse 21. For your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all your paths. The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them. The cords of their sin hold them fast. For lack of discipline, they will die. They'll be led astray by their own great folly. Fear God. His eyes are on you. Your ways are in full view of the Lord, he says. And the Lord, he's not just looking. The Lord is examining your paths. They matter to him. There is nothing that we can do that the Lord does not see. We get that, right? Even the sins that reside in our heart that only we know about, God sees them and God knows them. Now, some people take lust, for example. Some people might say, oh, what's wrong with a bit of lust? Just because you're looking at the menu doesn't mean you're going to eat the food. And we know what Jesus says. Even when you lust, you're committing adultery in your heart. You're straying and being led astray from your heart. And the Lord sees the heart, and the Lord loves the heart, and the Lord wants to be captivated by your heart, by our heart. And here it is, being filled with lust. Fear God. We're told that he examines our paths, he ponders our decisions, our actions. He thinks about them, maybe even more than we are thinking about them. Even while we might be pondering lustful thoughts, the Lord is consumed and wondering why we're walking down that path. Fear God. Marriage is God's gift to us, and we don't want to ruin a gift that someone gives us. This man here, there's probably only a couple of people who know who he is, Scott McLaughlin. I believe, Jeremy, that he is the current V8 supercar champion. Am I correct? Current, yes. He rides a Ford Mustang. I think that's his car right there. Imagine you get into V8 car driving. You're getting quite good at it, and you're becoming a bit of a pro at it. And along comes this man, and you're racing your own Ford beat-up car. Maybe it's a Ford Laser or something. I don't know. And he turns to you and he says, hey, I can see you're right into this car driving thing. Here, take my car. Get better at what you're doing. Take my car. I give it to you. Use it well. Well, at first, you're going to be like, oh, that's unbelievable. I've just got Scott McLaughlin's actual V8. And you're going to get on that track and you're going to be like, this is amazing. You'll practice a lot for a while. But can you imagine this. Imagine that Scott McLaughlin goes away for a little while and you're like, I'm going to do some donuts in this car. And you start spinning around the streets and you're dragging down Glenorchy and you're racing and you're not really using the car the way it's anticipated. And then Scott McLaughlin turns up. He says, what are you doing with my car that I gave to you? I was going to come back. I wanted to see you racing the track, not doing donuts and car theft and break and enters and ram raids with it. It's a gift. And in the same way, God says, I've given you a gift. It's not a race car. It's love and sexuality. And remember, they're going to ask what you did with it. Fear God. So there are our 4 tips. The 4 tips to remaining faithful. Flee, take the long view, stay loyal, and fear God. Now, I recognise that within our own community here at City North, we're in a mix and various stages of this. I just wanted to leave one word for those of us who are married, and I wanted to leave another word to those of us who are not married, single. To those of us who are married, this is never a safe place for us. Adultery is always a threat. It always has been a threat. It's amazing how often the Bible talks about it. In 3 chapters, 5, 6, and 7 in Proverbs, adultery is the key theme. Scientist and author Tom Eisenman suggests that all affairs are categorized by these 2 features: denial and then justification. Firstly, we deny, we pretend it's not actually happening, and we absolve ourselves after it's happening of responsibility by saying, well, it had to happen anyway. He states that there are generally 12 stages that an affair goes through. Stage 1 begins with a readiness, a leaning away from the marriage to somebody else. Step 2, there's an alertness of one other particular person. Step 3, it moves through intentional meetings in public. Then it lingers. It begins to become more private, Other people begin to notice. By about stage 8, there's an affectionate embracing, passionate embracing, and finally capitulation and sex. The stages of divorce, of an affair, seem to be generally true across the board. And I wonder, to those of us who are married, I wonder if you see yourself in one of these stages now. The truth is, there is no fairy tale ending to this. Nothing good can come out of it. The way of adultery is painful, it's destructive, and it is community destroying. Someone did say, yes, the grass is always greener, but you still got to mow it. And mowing a relationship built out of adultery is far, far more painful than restoring the relationship of your youth. To the married, walk away from that. To those of us not married, that we're singles, we don't want to get carried away here. Yes, sex and marriage is good, but it is not essential. Marriage, yeah, it's great, but it's not permanent. It's not eternal. The sexual revolution has lied to us by saying sex is the most important thing in our lives. We've made a god and an idol out of sex and the freedom of sex. And we've been told that our worth can be found in our sexual satisfaction. The gospel says, no, that's not true at all. That our worth is found in Christ and Christ alone, more than any human relationship. And I've got to say, us in the church have not done much better either. If someone is single or not yet married, we force people to think that they are lesser. When are you going to get married? Hurry up and get married. And we've seemed to think that you're a lesser person, that it's not somehow an adequate expression of your life being single. But it is. Jesus never married. Paul, as far as we're aware, never married. Jerry Maguire may have said to his lover, "You complete me." But in reality, that's rubbish. We are not completed by another person. Philippians 1 verse 6 says this, Christ says to us, "I will complete you." Marriage may portray the intimacy of the gospel, but singleness reveals its sufficiency. Yes, marriage is great, but we are sufficient in Christ when we are single. We're not less of a person, whether we're married or whether we're single, whether we've experienced sex or not, prevented of doing so because we're not married. Single is a right expression of humanity and of the Christian life. For some, it's a choice, and for others, it's just the stage that we're in. And some people will choose never to be married because in their eyes, God's kingdom and pursuing Christ is far more valuable.